Dead men don't negotiate, he'd say. And negotiation was what kept the city from turning into a shooting gallery where nobody came out alive.
The Fox. Chicago, 1919 to 1925. Johnny Torrio didn't raise his voice because he never had to. He arranged the room so nobody else needed to shout either. That was the first lesson he taught me, and it was worth more than all the sermons I'd slept through at St. Bartholomew's. A man who can make quiet do the heavy lifting will always spend less on bullets, less on bandages, less on the kind of headlines that make mayors remember they got elected on reform tickets. See, most fellas think power comes from making noise, from pounding tables and breaking jaws and letting everybody know who's boss. That's kindergarten thinking. Johnny showed me different. He was called the Fox because he never chased anything. He positioned himself where what he wanted would have to come to him. If there was blood on the floor when the dust settled, it meant somebody hadn't done the math right. And Johnny, he always did the math. I remember the first time I saw him work. We're sitting in his office above the flower shop on South Wabash. Johnny always liked the irony of conducting business over roses and carnations. When Mickey Finn comes in, red-faced and shouting about some Irish boys muscling his saloon. Mickey's waving his arms like he's directing traffic, spit flying, talking about honor and territory and all the things men talk about when they're too stupid to talk about money. Johnny just sat there, cleaning his glasses with a silk handkerchief, letting Mickey run out of steam like a broken radiator. When the silence got thick enough to cut, Johnny put his glasses back on and asked, real quiet, "Mickey, how much did they take?" "It ain't about the money," Mickey shouts. "It's about respect." "Everything's about money," Johnny says, still quiet as Sunday morning. "Respect is just what we call it when the books balance." He taught business like Mass on Sunday. Order first, sins later, everything in its proper place and time. Johnny could look at a city map the way other men looked at racing forms, seeing money where normal people just saw neighborhoods. Supply here, demand there. Corridors in between that connected them, like arteries in a body that never stopped bleeding cash. "You don't push liquor," he told me one afternoon, spreading charts across his desk like a general planning a campaign. "You conduct it. Like a good priest with a bad choir, you bring the loud ones down and the timid ones up until the whole hymn earns its echo." Brooklyn had taught me to keep my chin up and my fists honest, to take what came and give back twice as hard. But Johnny taught me something different, something that stuck longer than scars and cut deeper than any blade.
Oh, where are my manners? My name is Grimwick. And that was just one page of tonight's diary.
He taught me to keep my calendar cleaner than my conscience, to plan 3 moves ahead of the competition and 5 moves ahead of the law. Meetings before muscle, he'd say. Agreements that fed every mouth at the table just enough to keep the knives in the drawer, but not so much that anybody got fat and forgot who was serving the meal. You win by preventing fights you're sure you can win, he'd tell me. Steam curling from his teacup like a signature on a contract nobody else could read. Johnny made me his right hand without putting it in any newspaper, without filing any papers with City Hall. Not lieutenant. That was military thinking. And military thinking got you headlines you couldn't buy your way out of. I was his ledger man, his accountant with attitude, the guy who made sure the numbers added up even when the arithmetic got complicated by blood and bullets. I sat in back rooms with walls the color of old cigarettes and learned how to price calm like it was a commodity you could buy wholesale and sell retail. Trucks run on gasoline and permission, Johnny taught me, and both cost more than you'd think. You got to grease the wheels and the palms that turn them, got to make sure every cop on every beat understands that cooperation pays better than conflict. Warehouses breathe if you give them exits that look like alleys, Johnny explained, sketching diagrams on napkins that would disappear into ashtrays before the coffee got cold. A route is a promise with wheels, and a lost crate is a sin you confess in cash. Sometimes your own, sometimes somebody else's, depending on who made the mistake and how expensive forgiveness was running that week. I sharpened my pencil until it was a needle and stitched the corners of the operation together so tight the cops had to use scissors to find loose threads. Every speakeasy, every gambling den, every house where lonely men went to forget their wives, all of it connected like beads on a rosary, each one counting toward something bigger than itself. Johnny didn't hate violence the way some men hate snakes or spiders. He distrusted it, like fire in a kitchen. Useful when you needed it, inevitable as weather, but best when contained and controlled. Budget it, he told me one night, counting the day's take while rain drummed against windows that had seen too much. Like any other expense, overuse is amateur hour. Underuse invites amateurs to think they can take what's yours. He preferred treaties to triumphs, percentages to funerals, handshakes that lasted years to headlines that lasted days. Johnny would rather buy a rival's best man a new suit than buy 6 coffins and a week of front-page stories we couldn't edit. Dead men don't negotiate, he'd say. And negotiation was what kept the city from turning into a shooting gallery where nobody came out alive. Johnny dressed like an accountant who owned the building. Tie always straight as a plumb line, cufflinks, speaking in a small, educated voice that never had to repeat itself. Even his smiles were balanced columns. No carryovers, no rounding errors, everything adding up exactly the way it was supposed to. Men who worshipped noise and flash mistook him for soft, like expensive fabric meant weak character. They didn't know that softness is what steel feels like before you touch it, before you learn that what looks gentle can cut you in half without changing expression. When Prohibition hit like a thunderclap nobody saw coming, the city went thirsty in public and drunk in private, hypocritical as a politician's prayer. Johnny didn't gloat about being right. He'd seen it coming like weather on the horizon. He just recalculated, adjusted the figures, moved the decimal points to accommodate the new reality. To Johnny, the Volstead Act was just a clumsy middleman we could replace with better service and competitive pricing. Diplomacy with aldermen who needed campaign contributions. Courtesy with police captains who had families to feed and mortgages to pay. Roll the grease where the squeaks are loudest, he'd say, and pretty soon the whole machine runs quiet as a whisper. He never used the word bribe. That was crude, unprofessional, the kind of language that got repeated in grand jury rooms. He called it insurance. Premiums paid in envelopes that helped people remember who kept the machine from tearing its own belt, who made sure the gears meshed smooth instead of grinding each other into scrap metal. Johnny had a catechism for power, rules he'd recite like a priest saying Mass, words that carried the weight of commandments carved in stone. Keep your books in your head and your hands off paper that can be subpoenaed. Pay men on Friday for their work and their pride on Sunday, for their loyalty. Let the papers print what flatters the arrangement,
What makes the public think they understand what they're seeing? If you must be seen correcting a detail, not celebrating a victory that makes enemies remember their enemies. I learned the craft of absence from Johnny Torrio, the art of being in 5 places by making 4 men feel like they were meeting with the 5th. You don't have to show up everywhere if your instructions arrive wearing their own authority. If your reputation does the talking before you open your mouth. You don't have to threaten anybody if relief is cheaper than resistance. If helping you costs less than opposing you.
Johnny liked to say Chicago was a patient that needed specialists, not cowboys. The city was sick with competing interests, conflicting desires, appetites that the law couldn't satisfy and wouldn't admit existed. Brothels, gambling, booze. Each one was a limb of the same body. You don't slap one and expect the others to cooperate. You build a circulatory system. Cash flowing predictably as blood, favors returning like oxygen to the heart. I ran pressure checks on that system, made sure nothing was clotting, nothing was bleeding where it shouldn't. A saloon that paid late got a visit from a pianist who played everything off-key until the management remembered their obligations. If the music didn't fix the problem, a busted crate of good whiskey behind the bar usually did. Music before mallets, Johnny taught me. Persuasion before percussion. Johnny kept faith with numbers the way other men kept faith with God. If a man's cut was 8%, he got 8, not 7 in a shrug and an explanation about tough times. We bred loyalty by making arithmetic feel like mercy, by treating percentages like promises that meant something. It wasn't mercy, of course. It was design, engineering, the careful construction of a machine that would keep running long after the men who built it were gone. You can rule by fear for a week, Johnny explained, watching me calculate weekly tributes from establishments that existed in the gray space between legal and profitable. Fear is expensive. It requires constant maintenance, regular demonstrations, the kind of overhead that eats into profits. You can rule by reliability for a decade, by being the kind of organization that keeps its word, even when keeping it costs more than breaking it. People think I changed the outfit, that I took Johnny's careful operation and turned it into something bigger, louder, more dangerous. Truth is, I just scaled what he engineered, took his blueprint and built it in a larger size. Johnny had already designed the framework. Negotiation over napalm, a cartel with manners, politicians treated as clients rather than enemies who needed conquering. He taught me that a city will forgive almost any sin it understands. Greed, lust, the basic hungers that make people human, and almost none it doesn't. Give the public predictability, and they'll carry your water while swearing they're drinking rain. Help you break laws they voted for while pretending they don't know what you do for a living. On quiet afternoons, when the office felt peaceful as a library and the street noise seemed far away, Johnny would straighten a picture frame or adjust a pen on his desk and, without looking at me directly, ask who needed paying and who needed promising. He could read a month's worth of business by how I answered those questions. Names that smelled like garlic meant muscle work, violence that couldn't be avoided. Names that wore starch meant fundraising, political contributions that bought good weather with City Hall. Johnny kept the peace the way a good tailor keeps a seam, by knowing exactly where it would tear if you breathed too hard, if you pushed too fast, if you forgot that even the strongest fabric has limits. He understood pressure points, stress fractures, the difference between bending something and breaking it beyond repair. And yet, even the fox had limits. Boundaries he couldn't cross without changing into something he didn't want to become. Some men don't come to the table for a slice of pie. They come to flip the table and wear the crumbs like medals, to prove they can't be bought or reasoned with or controlled. When that kind of weather rolled in from the north side, when Jaime Weiss and Bugs Moran started talking about settling things with Thompson guns instead of handshakes, Johnny still argued for umbrellas, when everybody else was reaching for artillery. I took notes during those discussions. I took precautions, too. Made sure our people knew which way the wind was blowing. And when the time came, when the bullets found Johnny outside his apartment building, and he decided he was too old to keep dodging what younger men were too angry to stop throwing, I took the keys he laid in my palm, with a sigh his doctor would have called medical, and I called mathematical. Johnny didn't knight me like some medieval ceremony. He resigned me to the position, handed over responsibility like it was a burden he'd been carrying too long. "It's yours, Al," he said, voice all ledger and no lyric, all business and no poetry. "Keep it orderly."
There was grief in that order.
The grief of a man who had managed chaos for so long he'd forgotten it, charges compound interest on every day you let it run wild. If you listened close to his voice that day, you could hear fatigue counting backwards, adding up all the years he'd spent building something that required constant maintenance, constant vigilance, constant calculation of risks and rewards, and the price of keeping peace in a city that preferred war. I carried his catechism forward like a torch passed between runners. I wore it under sharper suits and carried it into louder rooms, but the words stayed the same. I remembered to budget fire, to overpay punctuality, to leave rivals just enough dignity to keep them from choosing martyrdom over lunch money. For a while, longer than anybody expected, including me, the city sang in key. The world credits me with invention, with creating something new and terrible and efficient. It flatters us both, Johnny and me. Truth is, Johnny Torrio taught me that an empire isn't a throne you sit on. It's a schedule you keep. Maintain it, stick to the timetable, honor the appointments and the obligations and the careful balances that keep everything running smooth. And men will call you king until the day they call you defendant. Miss that schedule. Let the timing slip. Forget that power is precision and precision is patience, and they won't call you anything at all. They'll just remember you as another guy who had something good and couldn't hold on to it. If I ever passed for a gentleman in those early Chicago years, if I ever convinced anybody that I was more than just another Brooklyn tough with good tailoring, it was Johnny's lessons living in my bones. His voice whispering the right moves when the game got complicated and the stakes got deadly. Johnny Torrio made me understand that being boss wasn't about being the strongest or the meanest or the most willing to pull a trigger. It was about being the smartest, the most patient, the most willing to treat business like business instead of like some personal crusade that would end with everybody dead and nothing accomplished. He taught me how to be a fox. I just had to learn, later, when to stop being clever and start being something else entirely.
I trust you enjoyed this glimpse into a most curious diary. If so, leave behind a small token of your delight with a like, and do consider joining our circle by subscribing. And remember, ring the little bell, and you shall be the very first to know when another diary or a fresh entry emerges from the shadows. And if a whisper stirs in your mind, a thought, a riddle, perhaps a name of someone whose secrets you would dare to uncover, leave it for me below. I read them one by one. And who knows, your wish may guide my hand to the very next diary I choose from my collection.